Wholeness, welcome. This is Josh Dippold of Integrating Presence, and today I have Frank, Jude, and Boccio with me. Frank, what's going on today?
Uh, it's a pretty warm day here. I'm in Tucson, and it's between rains. Like in the summer, we get like this heat that builds up with humidity, and then there's a big storm, and then for a few days, it's like really cool and nice, and then it builds up again. And one of my friends was like saying this time it feels like it's taking too long. Like as well as she put it, the foreplay is going on too long. She just wants the rain. And that's how I think we're all feeling.
Well, maybe there's more tension building than, but yeah, it's been hot here in Prague too. I think we're supposed to. Speaking of that, we're supposed to get rain. They're calling for a chance tomorrow, and things will cool down a little bit. But I don't think anything like the Tucson heat. I can't imagine. Coming from Denmark too, where it's really nice and cool. So I honestly, in Missouri weather, I'm not missing it at all,
Mm.
honestly. But
Missouri was pretty humid, right?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
really humid during the
Yeah.
during the summers for the most part. Really cold too in the winter, but yeah.
Everybody talks about like, well, where you are, it's hot, but it's dry heat. And I was like, dry heat at 110 degrees is still hot. It's like you're in an oven.
Yeah, it's like
But
opening the oven up. Yeah.
right. But what they don't understand is that in the summer, when it's the hottest, is also when it's the most humid.
Huh.
So yeah, and a little bit of technology here. We have swamp coolers. I mean, obviously, wealthier people have ACs, but and so swamp coolers work really well when it is hot and dry because what they do is they suck the hot, air in, they pass it through this like organic material,
Huh.
and then it blows into the house cool, moisture air, right? So you have to actually keep your windows open, which I like because AC it's so claustrophobic. But when it's humid, they're not as effective. So the time when you want it the most, they don't really work as well.
It's called a swamp cooler.
Yeah, yeah.
I
The
have to I
technical
have to
term
check
is
this out.
evaporative cooler, but yeah,
Okay, evaporative cooler. I have to check these out because in Missouri, no, it's yeah, we want less swamp, and people
yeah.
say it's because of all the artificial corn or some. I've just heard that recently. So much corn gives off so much transpiration, and
Oh
that's where a
wow.
lot of the weird humidity in Missouri. I don't know if there's anything to that, but either way, yeah, hot. So here we are in wherever the weather is where you're at listening to this. I hope it's okay enough. And I'll ask you the standard question that I often do. And who is Frank and what kind of work does he do?
Well, Frank is it's like taken me a longer time because I grew up at a time where we wanted to be assimilated. But I'm second generation Italian American and born in New York, raised in New York. Uh, Went through the whole punk scene. I was a DJ. Right? But what got me into Buddhist practice was that I did have a half sister who was about 15 years older than me who died of cancer when I was 16. And it's a very familiar story. I mean, like, I can't believe how, more and more whenever I read about things, it's like what leads people to practice often is some kind of loss. Dogen was because he was an orphan, and the Buddha himself, when he recognized that we're all going to die. Um, so that engagement with, like, all right, well, how do I want to live? What is life for? Really became very clear for me at 16. And it's been a guiding force. And that probably kept me alive even during the punk scene because things got pretty wild back in the 70s and 80s. But there was always this foundation of zazen meditation. And then I had already practiced yoga, but meeting Thich Nhat Hanh and his presentation on the Satipatthana, which is a sutta or a discourse where the Buddha really gave his most deep mindfulness instructions. And it has this whole point about working with the body. And I was like, well, up until that point, I always thought of my asana practice as a complement to meditation, something to prepare for meditation. But it was very clear that the Buddha was saying this can be meditation. And, this is like in when was it, I guess, 1990 91 or 2. And that's when I started to really integrate. And it was great because like up until that point, I felt like there were these two different things, and now it's completely integrated. And I've been doing that since then. I became a teacher in 1995. I was ordained as a Zen teacher in 2007. And yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Well, cool. I had no idea that Thich Nhat Hanh, I just not very familiar with his stuff at all, but I had no idea he taught Satipatthana, which is usually a Theravada mainstay. So I
Well, that's
would,
the thing. In
yeah.
Vietnam used to be, before it was a unified country, two separate kingdoms. And what was interesting is the Northern Kingdom was in the Chinese cultural orbit, but the Southern Kingdom was in the Indian cultural orbit. So unique to all the countries in Asia, Vietnam got both transmissions, the Mahayana from China and the Theravada from ultimately Sri Lanka. And so although Thich Nhat Hanh was in the Lin Chi lineage of Chan and Zen, they also, have this understanding, like he's done retreats on the Anapanasati, the Satipatthana. So I had been practicing for a long time. And like you said, yeah, of course, this was all new to me because I had been in up at that time, more Japanese Zen tradition. And they don't look at anything, Theravada or from the Pali Canon. And so it was eye-opening, and it was great.
Well, cool. And I have to give a shout out to the Shifu Jiru at the Mid America Buddhist Association, where I've practiced back in Missouri, which I'm sure not a lot of Westerners know about him. He's got a kung fu background. He, well, not talking too much about his background, but just needless to say, he's a Chan lineage holder and the Linji lineage holder too. And a lot of his teaching is for foundations of mindfulness. I think a lot of it has to do with him first ordaining as a Thai monk and then switching to Chan. So it's a really unique blend he's got.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I often describe, the way Thai taught Thich Nhat Hanh, and therefore the way I teach is when I'm teaching any of these Pali Buddhist practices, I'm teaching with a Mahayana heart.
Bodhicitta, yes. Oh, so well, a few other things you said there. The mindfulness of the body. That's there's like 6 different layers in the Satipatthana Sutta, and we don't hear much about the elements practice as much, and we don't mindfulness of death. I guess we hear it. Or I would should say this charnel ground contemplations to be more accurate, which can be very graphic for some people. I was listening to a monastic talking on a podcast recently, and just saying going to visit a corpse, and he would get squeamish and start to pass out.
Yeah.
So I guess it can be really intense for a lot of people. But like you mentioned, coming through the dukkha door, a lot of people are confronted with their own mortality in a very visceral, vivid way really early on. So I don't know, before we start getting into Anapana, I think with your yoga background too, I'd like to hear a little bit more about how those 6 levels or layers in the Satipatthana kind of map to yoga and what kind of yoga you do. And I'm in the same position too, where I was using it to support my sitting practice. I had a weekly practice for years, and I quit during the lockdowns and switched to more Qigong, but it really is a huge support. And of course, we know the historical Buddha, and I'll shut up here in just a second. He was really into yoga after, when he met his first teachers that taught him Jhana, to master the jhanas, and it was predates the Buddha too. So he was in complete mastery of. We were assuming, we don't have many details from the canon, but we can only assume with his mastery of jhana or dhyana that he was very well versed with yoga.
Yeah. The Buddha was a yogi, and my approach is that there's following Georg Feuerstein, actually, that, this ocean of knowledge that we refer to as yoga, maybe with a capital Y kind of right, then developed into 3 yogic cultures, right? So Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism are yogic based, right? They're all yogic paths, and each one has developed their own culture, even architecture, music, everything. And so I have, the Buddha as a yogi, as an archetype for a yogi. Even in a lot of Indian, like in Hindu temples, you see the statue of the Buddha meditating because that is the archetype. So I have no problem with saying that the Noble Eightfold Path is a yogic path. And when we talk about Satipatthana, well, first of all, you asked us. My approach I refer to as mindfulness yoga. And I'm really adamant about that, not mindful yoga. All yoga should be done mindfully, right? But like mindful yoga, the word mindful there is an adjective. Mindfulness is a noun. And so the difference here is that hopefully everybody is practicing Trikonasana, triangle pose, mindfully. But I am practicing mindfulness now in Trikonasana, right? So it's the prior, practice. It's the root of the practice is mindfulness. As it says in the Satipatthana, the Buddha should practice while standing, sitting, lying down, walking. And then he goes on to say, while bending over, while turning to the side, while reaching up, while putting your clothes on, while defecating. So everything, right? And so that's really my approach. And I actually, work with all four, what are traditionally known as the four foundations or establishments of mindfulness. I often refer to them as the domains of mindfulness. The reason for that being like the term foundation or establishment sounds like, okay, the body's the first establishment, and now we're going to build mindfulness on it. But it's more accurate to say we're bringing mindfulness to the domain or area of experience called the body. And then, as you pointed out, the 6 things, right? So you begin with the breath. Then you go to recognizing different postures of the body, different activities. So in a mindfulness yoga class, you can then, right with just that, begin to notice, when I'm in a spinal twist, I feel the movement of breathing in this part of my body, but when I'm facing forward, I feel it this way. When I'm in a back bend, I feel that my breath does this to my body. When I'm in my forward bend, it does this other thing. You're beginning to see impermanence, not self-nature, right? Because there's no inherent nature to the breath. In fact, you begin to realize there's no such thing as a breath. There's just breathing. So the core teaching of the Buddha is right there, right from the beginning, right? And then, as you pointed out, there's the anatomical parts. And here's where I think Thich Nhat Hanh is really offered us a very great gift. And I use both approaches. I actually have guided meditations on the parts of the body. As taught by the Buddha, it was to really get kind of equanimity and a more realistic view of the body, right? Just go through the body, observing it, trying to contain or yoke any reactivity, right? Because it's like, as you know, it's like, observe the eyes, but then also the mucus, and stuff like that. But Thich Nhat Hanh, noticing that there are such a lot of issues around body image, body dysmorphia in the West, he took the concept of the inner smile from the Qigong tradition and had smiling to the parts of the body. And sometimes I'll do that as a guided meditation in Shavasana. And one time in a public, I'll never forget this because it was feedback from me at how transforming this practice could be. I was offering a lecture in Raleigh, North Carolina, and it was a public discourse, and I included a smiling to the body parts. And at the end, the first person to speak up was this woman all the way in the back, tears in her eyes. She said, like, several months before that, she had been diagnosed with cancer, and doing that meditation was the first time she felt safe in her body, So it's like powerful. Then there's the elements. And again, in the Buddhist tradition, it was the elements as understood by the yogic philosophical tradition, earth, water, fire, air, and space. And I do that. But I think if the Buddha were alive now, he would also work with the 32 major elements that make up the body according to our system, right? We're carbon-based organisms, we're got all this water, which is made up of hydrogen and all that. Where did these elements come from? The Big Bang and supernovas. So again, we're seeing the not self nature, right? As you pointed out, eventually we get to the decomposition of the body. And I will say, I do not do this in a drop-in yoga class. But with my senior students and on retreats, if it feels right, I might do the 9 contemplations. I might not get very graphic if they're, but like if we've been together for 10 days and we've been practicing, I feel I can do that. With my senior students, 2 of which are now very close to ordination to become Dharma teachers themselves, when after a few years, when we went through the Satipatthana for the second or third time, when it came to that part, I had them watch videos of the corpse farms that the forensic scientists use, and they're really graphic. But as you said, the monks back then would go to the charnel grounds and look at these bodies. So yeah, I do that. But I also then work with the other domains as well, right? Sensation, mind and perceptions, and dharmas.
Yeah, it's I've even heard that they used to sit on the decomposing corpse bodies. I've even met a monk who made one of these austerity robes for one of the Dhatangas, where they take cloth from a dead body and then
Yeah,
they
it was
make a
very
robe.
traditional. Yeah, they would make their robes
Yeah.
out of the wraps from the corpses.
We get people that are really clinging to how they present themselves and how they have to have certain things, and so that would be a really interesting austerity. I know for in my own personal practice, whenever I do contemplate death, I just come right into my body. I mean, it has this immediacy about it that all these things that I think is so important, a lot of times they just fall off.
Yeah,
If we know, I mean, what kind of guarantee is there at the end, ultimately, that we will make it through the next half breath? We
of
can't.
course.
I mean, unless someone has psychic powers and can determine kind of with more certainty, and I don't know how that works, when they're going to die. Most of us, we don't have that guarantee of when we're going to
Yeah,
be
there
able
was
to, and how and where.
a Korean Zen master, Kolbong. I think it was Kolbong Sunim. I could be wrong with the name though. And he said something like a lifetime of 100 years depends on this one in breath, right? And as I point out, it's like we're all born. Our first breath is an in breath. We're all going to die with an exhalation. So in response to people who think watching your breath is boring, I go like, when you really consider that there's no guarantee you're going to have another in breath after the next exhale, you're going to pay more attention, And I want to say, I mean, like we're talking about all this stuff. It's like if there are people who are not familiar listening in on this, it's not morbidity or morbid kind of fascination with death that we have. If you look, I mean, like look at the Dalai Lama, look at most Buddhist teachers. There's a lot of joy, and it comes from, as it says in the Heart Sutra, the ultimate gift of the Dharma is the gift of non-fear. And so focusing and putting attention on the fact that we are mortal beings, we are going to die, when you come to reconcile with that, all the energy that goes into trying to deny that, consciously or unconsciously, is now liberated, and it's very nourishing. It brings us to joy.
It's a really important distinction to make, because I look at it a lot of times as not taking any moment for granted.
Mm-hmm.
How much of the time am I on autopilot, just going through the day, not realizing that every single moment is precious and not to be taken for granted? When this is contemplated, that's another huge benefit it gives,
Yeah.
To not take anything for granted, that every moment is precious, and it really has an immediacy to our thing. And then, like you said, that truth, when we're in alignment with that truth, that inevitability, being in alignment with truth can bring great joy to the heart too.
Yeah.
Just like the changing nature, what is subject to arise is subject to cease. When we're in alignment with that truth, it brings happiness almost on its own sometimes.
Yeah.
This
I
being
love
in
that you
alignment.
use the word alignment, because
Yeah.
I know there's scholars who question this etymology, but like the word dukkha, right? I hate that it was translated as suffering by the first translators, because when you hear the Buddha say life is suffering, it feels so overwhelming and not true. My life isn't suffering. I am not, but dukkha, wrong space, bad space, right? The image of an axle not directly in the center of a wheel leads you to understand that what he's basically saying is life is stressful. if you think about Iron Age India, it's probably a wooden wheel on a cart drawn on dirt roads by an ox. If you're not aligned with reality, if you're not aligned in the center, it's going to be a bumpy ride, right? So we want to align ourselves with reality. And the reality is, as the Five Remembrances remind us, we're aging. We can't avoid all illness. We're going to die. Everything we love and think we own, we're going to be separated from. But that fifth one, that it's our actions that we are, and that there's no way to avoid the consequences of our actions, really puts the emphasis on that. And many times I say that the Five Remembrances are probably the most single practice that has really made a big influence on me, because when I was diagnosed with cancer in 2019, other men, it was prostate cancer, other men that was going through treatment with me saw something different, asked me about it, and I ended up teaching the meditation, doing all this stuff, because quite frankly, I wasn't afraid. I didn't my doctor gave me these brochures, for the newly diagnosed, and all of them begins with the assumption that you're fearful or angry or depressed, and it's like, I'm of the nature to die. There's no way to avoid it. I'm of the nature to have illness. There's no way to avoid illness. So with that accepted, just do the next thing,
These have been a huge help in my practice too. One of the things is it prepares us for that. So it's not like it comes out of the blue and hits us as a shock. I can remember being so devastated by some losses in my life, but contemplating that it's inevitable that all relationships too end in estrangement or death. So when that time comes, it's not like getting hit broadside. It's like, okay, the heart and mind have been prepared for this. We're comfortable with this. Getting more comfortable with this inevitability. So it's just like training with anything else. The heart and mind gets trained in that self-responsibility of realizing, or at least having faith in intentionality, and action has consequences, be it skillful or unskillful. This self-responsibility can be so empowering as well. It doesn't have to be this huge burden that I can just, get out of my actions, but no, taking self-responsibility is a really an empowering movement. And so with that, going back to the again, this mortality, I think one of the ways we can get into the breath here for Anapana, and how you teach it, and anything you want to say about it, is there is this mindfulness of death practice that's really accessible with the breath, if I'm remembering right, Bhikkhu Analayo. And if I don't oversimplify, I think he points out the fact that the four foundations of mindfulness is attending, so you're attending to these things too. And I forget exactly the establishment foundation. I always thought that was there's a problematic aspect of, layer by layer, level by layer level, but remind me again what the word you used. And then, but with the breath, each breath in, we don't know if we're going to make it, to the next one, or even the finishing of that,
right?
And nor the out breath as well. And even if we do, we're one breath closer to our mortality, right? So that's one way to just use the breath with that. But so
yeah, I think it's funny when even as a child, way before I had heard of the Buddha, I was like, why does everybody get so excited at the New Year's celebration or birthday celebrations? It just means they're close to dying. But the breath thing really makes me think about this very silly story, but it's in the Zen tradition of a student telling his teacher. But I think this is relevant because what I see in contemporary yoga and some of the Buddhist contemporary communities is this desire to be special, right? And have special experiences and everything else. So this is an old story where the student goes to the Zen master and goes, come on, you're having us watch our breath, but there's something really esoteric, right? There's something else, And the teacher goes, no, really, this is it. He goes, but it's so boring. So they happen, for the purpose of the story, to be by a fountain or something. So the master takes the kid and puts his head under the water and holds him there for a while, and then pulls him out. And the guy goes like, and he goes, did you find that boring?
That's a great one. I love that. Yeah, and that's actually the one of the huge challenges I have with it is, that it is not that interesting. Yes, you can get into some subtleties when the breath gets more subtle, and I'm practicing more in the Pa'ak tradition in the Samatha thing now, where I'm working towards a nimitta, and I still haven't got nimitta after all these
Mm,
years. Well, I mean, I haven't been practicing this version too much, and there's a whole thing of Visuddhimagga jhana and Sutta jhana, and I'm open to exploring all these and different various aspects of it. But
mm,
yeah, it's by its very nature, the breath is a neutral thing, and it's great if I'm all amped up on emotions that aren't helpful, or you know have a lot of restlessness. Then it helps, can calm. And of course we can bring the energy up on, like, with an in breath, lower the energy down with more emphasis on the out breath, right?
mhm.
But
Yeah.
that's right. And I don't know how much I want to go to seek out as Zen master, but of course we hear in other spiritual traditions this is a expedient way, is to really become more and more intimate with death, or very dangerous situations. And I'm not really promoting this, obviously, or things like crazy wisdom tradition, which I was just talking to someone here the other day, how I feel that has to be done really carefully and to the right people at the right time. It's just not a one size fits all teaching.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm uh, seeing so much the damage that has been, justified by that kind of tradition. That, and even some of the way the guru relationship, I'm not so sure it's a good fit for Westerners in general. But like, yeah, I've always been a little skeptical of that. It's interesting, there's really three different student-teacher relationships found within the Buddhist cultures, right? And the Theravada, and it's the Kalyanamitta, the spiritual friend. It's like the Sherpa guiding you, right? You don't ask him who to marry or anything like that, right? And then in the Zen tradition, it's almost more like the uh, in the feudal system, where there'd be like an apprentice to the master, and you just spend a lot of time and you absorb stuff. But only in Tibetan Buddhism is the Lama, which means guru, a guru relationship, And maybe it's because I was a punk rocker and all that, but that is something I'm almost allergic to. And the way my relationship with my students is a kind of mixture of this Kalyana Mitta and the Zen kind of approach, because I following my Korean teacher Samu Sinim, who figured, all right, he came from Korea to the West, and he's like, Westerners need more data or information than we might get in an Asian Zen tradition. But he also was not going to, like, as he said, completely spoon feed. You had to kind of just pay attention and observe. No one taught me how to, invite the gong at the temple. I was just told to do it. And the only feedback I got is that if someone else was told to do it after that, I probably didn't do it right. So pay attention, and eventually learned by internalizing it. So I try to blend those two approaches. Yeah.
Very cool. I got to do Kolche in South Korea at Musangsa, and that was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had. And I really enjoyed the koan kongan practice there with a couple different masters, actually, and really something quite profound and special. I don't want to use that word special, but compared to what we're used to in the West,
Mm-hmm.
immersing in that deep practice, and me, who's often verbose and wanting to speak a lot and give, impart information through the voice, having to answer non-verbally was just an eye opener, I
Yeah.
guess. So yeah, there's not much I can really say so much about it, other than you have to just go do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you teach students the Anapana with either from the Anapanasati Sutta, these 16 layers
Mm-hmm.
of, or how do you teach it? And
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
it,
I, uh, I include it in my teaching in general, but when I have like people who are in a deeper Dharma study, um, for one calendar year, we work through the 16, like the 16 broken into the 4 tetrads. And we just go through it, and practice. And then they keep practice journal. We look at different approaches too. Like, we look at Thich Nhat Hanh's commentary, and we look at, I think it was Bhikkhu Bodhi's, and read suttas that from the Pali Canon where the Buddha is talking about it and commenting on it and all. We do a year on the Satipatthana. So we go as deep as possible over the course of a year in these teachings. I want to point out something that you mentioned before, because in my Dharma training program, I don't call it 5 years, I call it 5 segments. If you really devoted yourself, you could get it through in 5 years, but I've never had a student do it in 5 years, because the later ones take more time. The first 2 can easily be done in, actually the first 3, but it's the last 2 that take longer sometimes. The first year, we actually just emphasize shamatha practice. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book by Richard Shankman, but when you talked about like the Visuddhimagga and all that, like, I think it's one of the reasons why I spend time for that year looking at shamatha practice, and we use Richard's book, is that much of the contemporary confusion arises because a lot of people don't understand that there is a distinction between the sutta tradition, as Shankman calls it, and the commentarial tradition. And, the way I feel is like, if you resonate with one more than the other, great, but know it. Make it a conscious thing. And if you're going to integrate, do it consciously. What happens is, because there's not a conscious understanding of these two, a lot of what appears to be contradictory things might be, and that's where people get confused.
It really is an important point. There is kind of a jhana controversy too, whether what constitutes jhana, what doesn't. Even nimitta can be kind of a trigger word for some people, depending this context. I mean, nimitta does just mean sign, but in this context, with kind of the commentarial, or Visuddhimagga, it's and I see kind of pros and cons to each of these sides. One thing I would love to see, and I don't think it's going to be too long now, is the commentaries and sub-commentaries in the Pali Canon. We don't have full English translations of these yet, One thing I will say in my own practice is why I switched to this kind of Pa'ak tradition for now is most everything that I've been taught, especially in the Thai forest tradition, Vajjan Cha, which I'm forever grateful for. It's helped me so much. It aligns more kind of with my personality, I guess, and practice style, just the way in the world, and kind of more earthiness, practicality stuff. But it's all concept, In this Pa'ak tradition, it's based kind of on Abhidhamma, and which is another huge kind of controversy, or not controversy, but people have a lot of ideas about it. And then Visuddhimagga, this huge, massive meditation manual, really in depth, is that that approach is going into ultimate discern. Once you go through the samatha phase, which they usually want you to have as much as possible of the 40 objects in achieving jhana, and that version of jhana in all of them, pretty much. Or I'm sorry, let me take that back. There's certain ones that you can. Some only result in access concentration, but some of them will go into certain levels of jhana, and some of them will go all 8 or whatever. And unless you're a dry insight practitioner, then they start you off with the 4 elements. But anyway, so after and then not only that, but the mastery. So there's 5 different ways to master each jhana? Yeah, I think each jhana has to do, they have 5 levels of mastery, not just achieving it, but so anyway, and then once you're done with all that, then you get into discerning ultimate materiality, which, if you just talk to this somebody on the street, they might think you're mad, because you're getting into discerning directly with the mind these kalapas, these indivisible units of materiality that are supposedly said that are there regardless of whether or not there's an observer. So it's just mind-blowing. And not only that, but each one discerning all these different characteristics or features of each one, right? Okay, so that's just the materiality. Then you get into discerning ultimate mentality, and basically it's slicing and dicing all the, I guess, flavors of consciousness in their
Mhm.
constituents. This is seen
And even all the
directly,
different
moment by
elements too.
moment, with the mind moment by mind
Yeah.
moment. And it's just so profound. And so all the other Dhamma that I know is, compared to that, is a concept. They're
Yeah.
helpful concepts, but until I can see and know this directly for myself, I can't really blow it off. That's
Mhm.
how I feel, and that's why I've taken it on just as a background. I know people are probably getting sick of me saying that now because I've said it so much, but
Yeah, I think when you're like the analysis of experience, even how many stages in one perception they talk about, it's just pretty profound.
it
And I
is.
always joke, it's like, and they did this without MRIs, they like seeing how
I
things
know.
all
And I say
cognitive.
people that are into neuroscience, they should probably, be familiar with some of this. But this is not, again, I took a class with Abhidhamma, but that's all scholarly theoretical stuff.
Hmm.
I'm practicing with people who are seeing this and knowing this in their own direct
Yeah.
practice. So I think it's really profound. But anyway, setting that aside, um, so the Satipatthana, I'm sorry, not the Anapanasati. I'm going to go into um, any other aspects of this, like what, I guess maybe what challenges do you find with students who just, I mean, we're talking about basic breath meditation here
Yeah.
too, right? Just starting off, what are some of the challenges you see and how you deal with this in general? And then one of the other things I like to know, because taught that the more continuity we can have of the breath, even throughout the day, the
Hmm.
more mindfulness of breathing, keeping it going, if you have any tips for that as
Yeah.
well throughout the day.
Let me start with that because I probably would forget to add this on. And I get this again comes from Thich Nhat Hanh, um, and I share this with all my students, along with your formal practice, which is the meditation. Um, you want to try in what's called informal practice strategies, and so Thich Nhat Hanh offered one in particular, that bells of mindfulness. Right, so I'm doing something around the house and I hear my phone. I stop what I'm doing and I take 3 conscious breaths before answering the phone. Right. Um, I usually tell students we all have phones, so start with that. And once you've internalized that, look in your own environment for other things that can be used as bells of mindfulness. I live close to a railroad crossing, so the train whistle's another one of my bells of mindfulness, right? So things like that just bring you to presence, and using the breath, because again, it's like there's nothing more intimate and present than that. You can't have the last breath again, this is it. And then the other one is, I forget if Ty calls them this, but I've gotten to calling them micro practices. All right. So one micro practice that I usually recommend to my students start with, because they're already doing it, is we're supposed to be brushing our teeth for 2 minutes when we do it, right? For 2 minutes, let go of everything other than brushing your teeth, right? And it brings this intimate practice. Just last week, in fact, one of my students, a new student, um, got back to me the next day. She was so excited. She said, "Last night I brushed my teeth as a micro practice and I realized I never felt the bristles of my toothbrush before." Right? Because, as she put it, I was always somewhere else in my mind, right? And I shared with her, I says, "Well, don't be surprised if your dental hygienist even notices an improvement, because, if you're paying attention to something, you're probably doing a better job." I like the fact that you use the word attending. I think Analayo uses that. Attending is paying attention. So sometimes when people hear pay attention, it sounds strict or like a discipline. So it's just like, attend to this. Are you there?
Sorry, this, yes, I am. It's
Okay, cool.
just my laptop here, and this has happened before. Has I spilled coffee on it at one point, and
Ooh.
so now have to use my cell phone as a camera. So apparently something wasn't being attended to too well there. No, but
Talk about synchronicity.
right. This micro practice is really great, because I find myself looking at trying to look out a window a lot of times when I'm brushing my teeth, or trying to, in the society we have, how much we try to multitask, which
Mm.
we know is not really possible at
Yeah,
all,
yeah, it's not
right?
even neurologically really possible.
Yeah, well, I'm having technical difficulties with the camera here. It should come back on here in a second. Um, Well, I think actually, instead of me trying to troubleshoot the tech right now, why don't we start wrapping up? So the audio will still be okay here.
Okay. Yeah,
Um,
let me answer the
sure.
question though, because I
Oh yeah.
think the first uh, obstacle you asked, like when people come to Anapanasati, is and I hear this a lot. I mean, it's like as soon as people start attending to the breath, they find themselves trying to manipulate it, and that can become an obstacle. When Bhikkhu Bodhi teaches long breath, short breath, in a way, he almost teaches it as a kind of Buddhist pranayama. He says, play with it first. See what does a long breath feel like? What does a short breath? So I think, like when I first read his commentary, I was like, whoa, I was always taught not to manipulate the breath, but I think it's a really smart move, because it's like most beginners find that they lean in that direction anyway. So let them really at it, explore and experiment, and then it's a little bit easier to let go because you've explored it. But I think that is definitely like the number one issue that comes up
It
when
is.
people are asked to attend to their breath.
I changed my mind here. So yeah, there's some few things here to get into, and that is the huge one too. When we first start, and Thanissaro Bhikkhu, Ajahn Jeff, he uses this a lot in his short talks online, and you use the natural breath, but there's no need to if it doesn't feel comfortable. So he recommends changing it. If longer breaths feel more comfortable, do longer breaths. If shorter breaths feel comfortable, do shorter breaths. So yeah, like you're saying, play with it to be. The whole thing is supposed to be pleasurable.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, right? I mean, there's things where we can't. There's all kinds of things that can come up,
Yeah.
but I do that. But the thing is, though, this is a real issue a lot of times about what controlling the breath. Okay, I find myself controlling the breath. How do I not do that? Sometimes it's just say, oh, skip it. I'm just going to control the breath for now. It's all right. This is the one thing, though, I like about this Anapana spot. It's there's some advantages to it, and one of them is that you can't really control it here, right? It doesn't feel like I'm in charge of it right here, that I'm going to now move, or there's I say take it back, there's less options for control. Also, there's a subtlety. As amazing as feeling the breath throughout the entire body is, and how helpful it is for me at certain points, when the mind and body gets really calm, that can be actually fairly gross. I mean, a lot of times the breath just is hardly accessible at all. Other times, when really tuned in, settled, then I mean, okay, now I'm paying attention to it in my nostrils, I'm paying attention to my throat. Okay, then something in my gut, and then my chest, and then the expansion. So there's so many different potential perceptions and how much change happens. But if I'm doing a samatha practice, I don't want to be doing a lot of investigation in the body and a lot of changes, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the advantages I feel of that. I think towards the back of the body too, if I'm paying attention in the back of the body, there's less room for me to feel like I'm in control and, manipulating the breath and things
Yeah.
like this too.
Yeah, when I'm emphasizing shamatha, it's like I definitely do that. But
Mm.
but being in the Zen tradition, most of the time it's the belly.
Yes,
Yeah,
Dantian is that what
yeah,
some call it? Yeah. And what remind me the reason for that again? I mean, that's a huge energy source, right? And a
yeah.
huge
I mean,
portion of
in the
stability
Japanese
too.
tradition, it's called the hara, and if any people who learn any martial arts, or even actually um, things like shiatsu, they're encouraged to really move from the hara, and it is a really powerful thing. I remember one time being massaged by this woman who was like, she looked like she might have been 90 pounds dripping wet or something. But when she leaned into me, it felt like a bulldozer, really got deep work and all that. And if she was trying to use her arms and muscles, it would be very fatiguing, but she moves from the hara. And so, yeah, that's, I remember Dido Lori once saying that he would actually, if, like, had heard that, like, if people really were hara centered, if they did something that created embarrassment, their belly got warm instead of their face flushing. They're so centered there. But I think, I joke about how, like, there's the school that's the eyes closed, eyes open, right? At the nostrils, at the belly. And, I kind of joke about it because my experience is the reason why the school that says eyes closed is because you don't want to be distracted. And the Zen tradition, eyes open, because they don't want to fall asleep. And my experience is eyes open or closed, I can get distracted, eyes, and I can also fall asleep. It doesn't matter ultimately. But for certain, since depends on where you read, but like up to 90% or so of our sensory information is through our eyes. When I'm doing shamatha, I close my eyes and I focus on my nose. I'm bringing that narrow thing. But when I'm doing shikantaza, just sitting, it's in the belly because it's more spacious and expansive, and my eyes are partially open, right? And the reason for that is Zen is much more a this worldly orientation. It's not the world renouncing of the Theravada, right? And so what we're really doing is trying to change our relationship, right? So eyes open, all the sense doors are open, but they're guarded as opposed to closed. And that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, the eyes open thing, I don't do it as much. Yes, I feel I can go deeper and more subtle with eyes closed, like you're saying in samatha. But the eyes open, that's how we face most of our life,
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a huge, there can be a certain type of practice, I find in my experience, a huge contrast there, but between going really deep within with eyes closed and then meeting the world and seeing all the shenanigans in the
Mm-hmm.
world and such vivid, I don't know, detail. Sometimes I'm grateful that I'm nearsighted and I'm too stubborn to wear my glasses because I know how stressful the world is, and then to just see all that really sharp and clear, it's just even more stressful sometimes.
Yeah. When I sit, obviously I don't have my glasses on, and it's pretty blurry, which is actually, it's like we're encouraged in Zen to keep a soft, unfocused gaze because you don't want to be trapped. Let's say there's a particular pattern on the floor. So the instruction is, your eyes are gazing down, which actually calms the body, apparently, 45-degree angle. But also imagine you're looking to the horizon. So it's like a soft, unfocused gaze, but all the senses are open. And speaking of the senses, I wonder, have you done much with sound meditation at all?
I've done sound baths and things like that, but are you talking about there's a thing called the nada sound? Or this really, I mean, I always wonder how if this is different from tinnitus, because if you're really quiet a lot of times, there's this really kind of silver hum in the background that some
Mhm.
people have called the nada sound. Now, do you mean internally or do you mean externally, like with singing bowls and
I mean, I know sound baths and singing bowls have become very popular, and they're lovely. I'm talking about like when the Buddha's most succinct instruction, and it was an advanced instruction, in the hearing, let there just be the hearing, right? So I'd be sitting here, playing right now, um, cultivating the capacity to hear birdsong and jackhammers at the same level of equanimity, not grasping after one, not pushing away the other. Also, can I just hear, and when it's gone, no more earworm kind of like hearing it over and over again. It's a really powerful practice, and it's said that it could be one of the most powerful because it's related to the element space. Like each of our sensory organs is related to one of the five elements. So you're talking about space, sound, So that's what I mean. Like I go up to the Mount Lemon, and there's a brook up there, and just listening. I mean, water sounds constantly changing, and then occasionally a cracking in the woods, maybe some deer or something, and just immersing myself in the sound.
Oh yeah, it is. There's a lot to say about this too. I know during a part of my early practice, this was a really challenging thing because I wanted my quiet, my meditation space, and how, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're making so much noise. I just want some peace and quiet, right? Today, it's when they do register, it's the emotional charge. I think it has been leveled so much compared to years and years ago, I would find. But yes, this notion of equanimity, of hearing these contrasting things. We can hear like a bird song and think, oh, that's so lovely, right? And be attached to it and want to hear really pleasant sounds. Think about, someone that we find that we really love hearing their voice, or some beautiful piece of music, and how we can be attached to that. Not that that's necessarily a wrong thing, but then a really harsh, grating sound. And maybe it's a sound that's linked to a memory that's really not pleasant and
Mm-hmm.
actually can be almost re-traumatizing sometimes for some people. So we have this huge emotional spectrum with sounds too. And then, but we also have the capacity, like you said, to say, okay, like in the Bahia Sutta, I think that's the one you're referencing.
Yeah,
In the herd is just the herd, in the scene is just the
yeah,
scene. It is really profound. We notice that we have an organ, ear organ, obviously, and then there's a sound. And when these meet, there's a sound consciousness. So there's also a difference between hearing and listening, right?
mm-hmm.
So listening is an active thing, and hearing is can be an inactive thing. It's a little bit easier with looking and seeing to
Right.
notice this. But yes, because usually we're focused on the object of awareness, the object of attention. Little, at least in my experience, there's it takes more prompting to say, oh, there's awareness of the object. There's this capacity to have knowing what that okay, we have this um, hearing capability. We're just usually focused on what we're hearing. And
Right.
of course, this common thing amongst meditators, okay, getting the perception how faulty it can be and thinking we're hearing one thing when it's actually something completely different. I'm sure we have all these kinds of stories of that during
Yeah.
meditation. Yeah.
Well, the beauty though is also that, like if you're doing concentration practice, sound is definitely an obstacle. But here, mindfulness, it doesn't become an obstacle. Training.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah.
Especially if we do open awareness things, because it's just moment by moment, whatever we're noticing then becomes the object
Yeah.
of meditation. Really helpful when driving too,
Yeah.
because we can potentially deal with so many different stimuli on a real rapidly changing basis.
I love
So
that you
yeah.
just mentioned that because the image that I use when I'm lecturing on a whiteboard, um, concentration, I draw what looks like the letter V. But I say, imagine this as a funnel that's been sealed off, right? At the top is the drunken monkey stung by the scorpion, as the mind is described in the Upanishads. And you focus on one thing, right? Mindfulness catches the mind wandering, you keep coming back. If you're lucky, if you've got the conditions appropriate, you get to the bottom of the funnel, that's one pointedness. If it lasts, it's samadhi, and you're not aware of other things, right? But with mindfulness, I draw like what looks like an hourglass. The top part, you still have to concentrate, but to that, what the commentary tradition calls stabilization. And then the bottom is opening, like you said, right? And it's like at the beginning of the bottom part, it's maybe the first domain of mindfulness. And then you go through the second and third. By the bottom, it is the choiceless awareness, open, I call it the big sky mind. And then it's just one thing after the other. But the thing with the sound that's really difficult is, and I do this every time when I'm introducing it, I'll go like dun 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 dun, and every time somebody has to go dun dun, but even the people that don't hear that in their head, and I go, but I didn't say that part, right? That's why it's like it's way more advanced than people expect. It's like what could be easier than listening?
Well, it's huge too, and I'm going to use that hourglass metaphor if I may. That's great. I love that. Yeah, earworms, oh wow, did I not realize until I started meditating how you can have a song play over and over and over
Yeah.
again, you know. And then once I cut off a lot of music in my life, especially ones that are lyric based, but one, you go into a store in America and you hear this pop song I haven't heard in 10 years. And the next thing I know, it's in my head for a week, you know?
Uh-huh.
So this is how powerful and how emotionally loaded these songs are too, how much emotionally invested I was in a lot of these songs too. So yeah, and they're designed with that earworm in effect. They
Yeah.
want people to
Well,
keep,
they call it a
yeah,
hook, right? They
yeah,
call.
hook. That's exactly what it is, you know? So,
I was
yep.
the assistant to a Zen priest once on a retreat in Italy, in Assisi, right? And in one particular sit, my mind was all over the place, but just thinking about, did I do that right, blah, blah, blah. And then the priest that I was assisting and I went for a walk, and we're walking in the forest, and he wanted to like process how the retreat's been going. But the first thing he said was that he had the bridge of some Led Zeppelin song in his head the whole time. So I was like, and it made me feel a lot better to think, all right, here's this. It was hysterical.
I do love a lot of these Zen teachers, how they just can put people almost instantly to ease. I remember the first time I did a formal tea ceremony there, and then I later was saying, you know, I really enjoyed that. Thank you. I just didn't know how to act, you know. And he goes, "Not me either."
Yeah.
I was like, that's kind of a
And those are the
relief, you know.
best teachings when they come.
Yeah, exactly. You know. Well, this has been quite a joy and an honor and a pleasure too. Talking shop a lot here as well, and I'm glad we got into some of these particulars of Anapana. And yeah, this I'm glad I'm having a chance to do this series, and I appreciate you coming on to talking
Yeah.
about these things. Yeah.
I've enjoyed it a lot too. And I want you to be aware, given what we're talking about, my t-shirt says, all tattoos are temporary tattoos.
Ah, very Anicca.
Even my, like, often I've got a collection of t-shirts, and many of them are dharmic, like subtle, some more than others, one says, death is only the end if you think the story's about you. But yeah, Anicca, I like this one a lot.
Very cool. So with that, tell people, do you have these T-shirts on your site? And what else do I know? You're an author. You have Dhamma books, right? You have Dharma books. You're of course you're a teacher. So tell people about how they can get in touch with you if you're taking on new students. What kind of courses you have coming up? Anything at all you want to let people know what you have going on, maybe even in the works. And then after that, take the audience out on a final message.
Okay. Yeah, I do have one book that is the core of bringing the Satipatthana and the Anapanasati towards asana practice, and it's called Mindfulness Yoga, and it's published by Wisdom. It's available anywhere, like Amazon if you use that, but independent stores you can get it directly from Wisdom. And I have writings in other books. One that I'm really happy with is it's in this book called 21st Century Yoga that looks at culture and history and all that. And another one that Michael Stone put together that was Freeing the Body, Freeing the Mind. And that's a fairly long essay that goes through the four foundations, or domains of mindfulness. I am currently, I don't have anything, like I'm always open to travel. I don't like to travel as much as I used to pre-pandemic. Sadly, a lot of the studios that were bringing me in closed during the pandemic. So if there's anybody out there who would like to have a workshop or a weekend kind of thing, I'm always available. But, my website is mindfulnessyoga.net. And at that website, there's access to blogs that have, some of them are simply posts to the blog. Others are articles that I've written for Yoga Journal, Tricycle, Shambhala Sun, things like that. And I also am doing a online yoga class. What happened out of the pandemic was the studio that I was with that ended up closing, like everybody else, went online. And because I had students around the world, when the studio opened and then it ended up closing because people didn't come back. I stayed online and decided I would go to the old school. When I started practicing yoga, class was an hour and 45 minutes. You got a nice long shavasana, and there was pranayama and meditation. So in an hour and 45 minutes class, maybe 45 minutes to an hour is asana, body practice, and the rest is meditation, pranayama, and relaxation. And that's just once a week on Sundays in the morning. And people could always email me for resources or anything else through my website, again, mindfulnessyoga.net.
Well, very cool. The pandemic, it changed a lot of things, didn't it? Yeah, it's for good, ill, and otherwise, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah, I was scheduled to do a tour of 4 yoga studios in Ontario in April 2020. Things shut down in March.
I know I had a couple of meditation events booked around St. Louis around that time too, and even after everything reopened, yeah, that didn't happen. So it's wild how life unfolds sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, Frank, thanks again so much, and may everyone listening to this, may your yoga practice and mindfulness practice and Anapanasati practice be for your liberation, welfare, and benefit, and for that of all beings. May all beings everywhere realize awakening, be free. Bye.
Svaha.